Maria Caulfield, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Women, who joins me in the studio. Thanks very much. Just on our lead story today, President Putin meeting Kim Jong-un. They seem very, very friendly in these pictures, don't they? Very warm handshakes all round. How concerned is the government about this alliance?
Well, obviously, there's concern, but it just shows how isolated Russia has become, that they're now dependent on that relationship. And, it strengthens our resolve to support Ukraine in their efforts. But obviously, we'll be keeping a close eye on any kind of decisions or movements that comes out of that meeting.
What are you most concerned about?
Well, I think, we want to make sure that we're supporting Ukraine, and whether there's any kind of assistance given to Russia, that would be of concern. But, it doesn't change our actions in terms of what we're doing to support Ukraine and to reinforce our message to Russia that they need to end this illegal invasion.
I mean, are you worried? I mean, when you just look at these pictures, these two guys, they've both got nuclear capabilities. They're sort of the last two people in the world that you really want ganging up on you, aren't they?
Yeah, well, we don't necessarily see it as ganging up. What we see is two isolated nations that really only have themselves to rely on, and it shows that the measures that we've taken against Russia are working, and that's why they're having to find influence elsewhere. And we just reassure Ukraine that our resolve to support them remains.
OK. The other big news in the last few minutes, economic growth has just been announced. GDP fallen by 0.5%, which is worse than economists had expected. The government said it would grow the economy, but doesn't this show that the government's programme is failing?
Well, it shows two things. Firstly, it shows that our message on inflation is right, because until we get inflation down, there will be pressures on the economy, including on growth. It's the single biggest enemy of every household, but also every business, and that's what we've seen. But the ONS have also commented in their figures this morning that actually strike action has had an influence on the growth figures. So, it once again it kind of reinforces our message that we want to get the strike actions resolved. But they did actually see, growth in some sectors that are encouraging, and our forecasts for future growth have recently been upgraded and remain higher than some of our neighbouring countries, such as Germany and France. So, yes, we're disappointed with today's figures. There is reasons for that, and strike action hasn't helped. But the forecasts then still remain positive in terms of the short-term future.
Given that strike action is singled out as an element that's affected this, does it show that the government's policy of not engaging with a lot of those who are striking has been a mistake? Shouldn't the government have engaged more to try to stop these strikes, to get back around the table and get pay talks going, rather than refuse to do that?
Well, we did, if you look at the nurses and other healthcare workers' strikes, we engaged in talks there, and we came to a resolution. Over 1 million healthcare workers got their pay rise just a couple of months ago, and those strikes were resolved. On the issue of junior doctors and the consultants, they're asking for a 35% pay increase, and that would do what we're seeing is stoke inflation based on pay rather than costs, and then that makes inflation much harder to tackle. We can't afford a 35% increase. We have given junior doctors between 8 and 10% this year, and if you look at the deal they settled with in Scotland, which was 17% over 2 years, that's not too dissimilar a deal, and yet they're not settling with us in England. So, there is, we can't go to 35%. We have given 8 to 10% to junior doctors and 6% to consultants. And we think that's fair and reasonable, given that's what was recommended by the independent pay review bodies.
Are you worried that we could be heading for a recession?
There's no indication of that, and only this week our forecasts were upgraded, and compared to other countries, the forecasts are better than many other countries. So we're confident, and there is an explanation from the ONS as to why this month, these set of figures have shown growth falling, and we're confident that we can get on top of that.
So confident no recession on the horizon.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister's been very clear that to tackle that, inflation has to be the key element to that, and getting inflation down. And there's always pressures to spend money or to introduce tax cuts, but we've been really clear that we've got to make those difficult choices until we get inflation down. Interest rates will be affected, and growth will be affected as well, and that's why it's a key priority for the Prime Minister.
Can I ask you about Sky's analysis of figures out today, which show that more than 3,000 children lost out on their learning last year because they were suspended? What's going on at the nation's schools?
So, I'm not going to comment or criticise head teachers who either exclude children from school. There'll be key reasons for doing that. What I can say is we are putting intensive, from my point of view, in terms of a mental health minister, we're putting intensive support in schools. We do know that children were affected by COVID in terms of isolation and behavioural changes. Teachers say that to us all the time. And that's why we're putting in mental health support teams into schools. So for those children who are struggling, maybe with attendance, maybe with other issues, they're getting that support in school. And we're supporting over 3,000 schools and colleges at the moment with 400 mental health support teams. We also know that DfE are trialling new measures as well. They've got this new contact hub so that parents are being told when their children are not in school. So if they're expecting their child to be in school and they're not, they know about it as quickly as possible. And they're doing some bespoke work about certain groups of children that are much higher risk of being excluded than others. But, it is for head teachers to make that decision. And, there will be particular reasons why they exclude or suspend certain children.
You talk about certain groups, of course, you're also Secretary of State for Women, and girls are being disproportionately affected here, far more girls than boys. Why do you think that is, and what can you do about that?
Well, I haven't looked at your figures in detail, but we do know that girls, for example, have been challenged. And we're seeing that in, the mental health support teams that I was talking about. We're seeing a significant rise in girls with eating disorders and with other mental health issues. So that kind of reflects what we're seeing from a mental health perspective. And that's why rolling out these teams in our schools, we want to get to nearly 50% with, just over 12 months' time. That will make a significant difference so that those, particularly girls, if they are struggling at school, will get that support in the school, and it makes their attendance much more likely to be sustained.
Final thought, we're reading in the paper this morning that MI5 warned the Conservative Party that 2 potential Conservative MPs could be spies for China. So this week we've had first a parliamentary researcher, now potentially 2 MPs. Are you concerned that the Conservative Party is being infiltrated by spies? I'm not
sure it's the Conservative Party. I think any party who's in government will be targeted by these foreign agents. And, any, information or intelligence that comes forward, will be taken seriously, as we've seen in this case. But I think it's a kind of a reinforcement of the message that there are always threats to us in a variety of forms, and targeting Parliament, targeting government is one of those tools that they do use. So we do need to remain vigilant.
And you're here today talking about the cost of living. I mean, it's been a balmy week for the weather, but winter is on the horizon, isn't it? Is it going to be a tough winter? We've got COVID back on the horizon. NHS backlog is so high. What are you predicting? So
that's why we're starting earlier than ever with our winter preparedness for the NHS. We know that last year we did struggle because flu was quite high. We had a strep A outbreak and we had high levels of COVID. And what the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary have been doing over the last few months, and will be ramping up from now on, is getting that winter preparedness into action. We're bringing forward our vaccine rollout. So this week, care homes are starting to be vaccinated with both flu and COVID vaccines. Next week, the over 65s and those who are vulnerable will be coming forward to get theirs. We're introducing extra capacity in our hospitals, so we've got 10,000 virtual beds, so patients can be treated at home. We've got 5,000 extra permanent beds in our hospitals. We've got more staff, and in our social care, we're actually seeing more staff working in social care now than in the NHS. So we're ramping up our social care packages. We've reduced the number of people waiting for social care packages by 12%, freeing up beds, and as a response, we've seen our Category 2 responses with ambulance halve over this last year. So we're getting all the infrastructure in place. So should we have a flu outbreak, should we have a similar strep A outbreak, that we'll have that resilience to deal with it. But every winter is challenging, but we're more prepared than ever before.